1984 is a dystopian novel by George Orwell, published in 1949 and widely regarded as one of the most powerful warnings ever written about political control and the fragility of truth. Set in a bleak future where the state governs not only actions but thoughts, the novel explores how power can reshape language, memory, and even human identity. The story unfolds in Oceania, a vast superstate locked in endless conflict with rival powers. Oceania is ruled by the party and its mysterious leader, Big Brother, whose image stares from posters that seem to watch every citizen. Surveillance is constant, history is rewritten daily, and language is stripped down into newspeak so that dangerous thoughts become impossible to express. In this world, truth is not discovered, is manufactured. At the center of this society lives Winston Smith, a thin, weary man in his late 30s who works at the Ministry of Truth. Each day, Winston alters newspapers and records so the past always agrees with the party's current claims. If the party changes its story, Winston changes history. Outwardly, he appears obedient and insignificant, but inwardly he carries a quiet sense that something is terribly wrong. He feels that the party is built on lies, yet he cannot fully prove it, because even his own memories feel uncertain. Winston's first act of rebellion is almost invisible. In a small rented corner of his apartment, he begins a diary. The act of writing private thoughts is forbidden, and every word he records is a thought crime. When he writes the words down with Big Brother, he is not only expressing anger, he is reclaiming his individuality in a world designed to erase it. From that moment on, Winston becomes a man living in two realities: the public world of obedience and the private world of forbidden thought. Life in Oceania is shaped by fear and isolation. The thought police monitor citizens for any hint of dissent, and even a careless expression or nervous gesture can lead to arrest. Children are taught to spy on their parents, friendships are shallow, and loyalty belongs only to the party. Winston feels profoundly alone, haunted by vague memories of a time when people spoke freely and trusted one another. Yet he cannot be sure whether those memories are real or imagined, because the party controls the past itself. Winston's inner rebellion deepens when he meets Julia, a young woman who works in the fiction department. At first, he suspects her of being a loyal party supporter, but she secretly reveals her hatred of the regime. Their relationship becomes both a personal awakening and a political act. They meet in hidden places, away from telescreens and microphones, and eventually rent a small room above an antique shop. In that fragile space, they rediscover emotions. The party seeks to destroy desire, affection, trust, and hope. For Winston, love becomes a symbol of resistance, proof that the human spirit cannot be completely controlled. For Julia, rebellion is practical and instinctive rather than philosophical. Together, they begin to imagine a world beyond the party's reach. Winston becomes obsessed with the idea that an organized resistance movement, known as the Brotherhood, must exist somewhere. The Brotherhood is said to be led by Emmanuel Goldstein, the party's declared enemy and the focus of daily public hatred. When Winston and Julia are approached by O'Brien, a high-ranking party official, Winston believes he has finally found an ally. O'Brien invites Winston into his home and speaks cryptically about rebellion, giving him a forbidden book that explains the party's ideology. Reading the book feels like a revelation. It explains that the party's true goal is not peace or equality, but power itself, power over reality, language, and the human mind. For the first time, Winston feels that he understands the machinery behind his world. For a brief moment, hope enters Winston's life. He believes that truth cannot be suppressed forever, and that the party's contradictions will eventually collapse. Yet, this hope is fragile. Winston and Julia are betrayed when the hidden room they believed was safe is revealed to be under constant surveillance. The thought police arrest them, and they are taken to the Ministry of Love, a place whose name hides its true purpose: torture and reprogramming. Separated from Julia, Winston is subjected to relentless psychological and physical torment. O'Brien reappears, no longer as a potential ally, but as Winston's interrogator. He reveals that he was never a rebel. His role was to lure dissidents into exposing themselves. Through calculated torture, O'Brien dismantles Winston's beliefs piece by piece. He insists that reality is not objective, but defined by the party. If the party declares that 2 + 2 = 5, then it must be true. Winston clings desperately to logic and memory, but his resistance slowly erodes. The party does not merely seek obedience, it seeks total control of the mind. O'Brien explains that the future the party envisions is a world where power is eternal and individuality no longer exists. The most devastating moment comes in room 101, where prisoners face their deepest fears. For Winston, that fear is rats. Faced with unbearable terror, he betrays Julia, begging that she be punished instead of him. In that instant, his last emotional bond and final act of resistance collapse. When Winston is released back into society, he is transformed. The man who once questioned reality now accepts the party's version of truth without hesitation. He encounters Julia again, but their connection is hollow. Both have betrayed each other and lost their capacity for love. Sitting in a cafe beneath the gaze of telescreens, Winston reflects on his journey and realizes that he now genuinely loves Big Brother. The party has succeeded not only in controlling his actions, but in reshaping his identity. The deeper meaning of 1984 lies in its exploration of power and truth. Orwell shows how language can be manipulated to limit thought, how propaganda can replace reality, and how fear can erase individuality. The novel reveals that when a government controls information, memory, and language, it can ultimately control human consciousness itself. The mocking illusion of freedom in Oceania exposes how fragile liberty becomes when people lose the ability to question authority. Winston's psychological journey illustrates the tragedy of resistance in a totalitarian world. He begins as a quiet skeptic, searching for authenticity, but he is gradually broken down and rebuilt by the party. Julia represents a different form of rebellion, rooted in personal pleasure rather than ideology, while O'Brien embodies the cold intelligence and cruelty of authoritarian power. Together, these characters reveal how totalitarian systems attack both the mind and the heart. The societal context of 1984 reflects Orwell's critique of totalitarian regimes, particularly those of Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, as well as broader concerns about censorship, surveillance, and political manipulation. Written in the aftermath of World War II, the novel expresses deep anxiety about the future of democracy and the vulnerability of truth in an age of mass control. Orwell's tone is precise, bleak, and quietly devastating. His language is clear and direct, mirroring the cold logic of the party while exposing its moral emptiness. By focusing on the inner life of an ordinary man, Orwell transforms abstract political ideas into an intensely personal tragedy that feels both distant and disturbingly familiar. In the end, 1984 is a story about the destruction of truth, the erosion of identity, and the terrifying potential of absolute power. Through Winston Smith's rise and fall, Orwell warns that the greatest threat to humanity is not only physical oppression, but the gradual loss of the ability to think, remember, and love freely. The novel endures as a timeless reminder that freedom begins in the mind, and that once the mind is conquered, everything else is lost.